So with our last topic for Unit 4, we're going to be taking a look at society, colonial society, how it was affected by all of these different cultural and linguistic groups coming together. Now, the first place we start is religion, by looking at Christian syncretic faiths. And syncretism, or syncretism, however you pronounce it, is when you have multiple ideas meshing together as one. Now, when we look in Latin America and South America, many clergy had arrived and they had attempted to impose European-style Christianity amongst the natives. But the geography of the territory and just the sheer numbers and the linguistic differences made this near impossible. Progress was very slow. So indigenous beliefs eventually blended together with Christianity to form what's sometimes been called an Amerindian Christianity. Now, the converts of those who were in the viceroyalties of Mexico and Peru, who often descended from the Mexica and Inca, were the largest group of Catholics who strayed from Orthodox Catholic doctrine. Many believed that after conquest, their old gods had abandoned them, and the new church did allow them to make sense of this new world. Often, the older beliefs and rituals became embedded within celebrations of the Christian saints, and specifically of the Virgin Mary, whose veneration allowed many Mexica to retain the presence of a female deity that was important to their faith, and this deity had been a fertility goddess. In 1531, a peasant named Juan Diego even claimed that the Virgin Mary had appeared to him in a field, and the local bishop didn't necessarily believe him, but he did not suppress this new belief, or in some cases it was called a cult. Now, the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe, that's how this belief manifested itself, in Our Lady of Guadalupe. This basilica was constructed at the foot of a hill where this fertility goddess, Tanatzin, was said to have worshipped. So, in Latin and South America, we have syncretic faiths. Vodun is a syncretic faith that mainly manifests itself in Haiti, but in other places as well, and it has its roots in West African religion. And it centers around the idea that there are divine spirits and elements that govern the earth. There are forces that govern nature and natural elements, like rocks and streams, and ethnic Vodun deities are part of each tribe and clan, so it's the center of religious life. This concept is seen as consistent with Catholic doctrine and the practice of praying through the saints and angels. So West African faith and the Roman Catholic faith did combine to produce this new faith, known as Vodun. Now, in this time frame, so leading up to 1750, the patterns of society, culture, and commerce became well established in the Spanish-speaking portions of the Americas. These systems were introduced by a Spanish elite that emphasized the concept of purity of blood, and this goes back to the Reconquista. During the Reconquista, public offices were reserved for those of purely Spanish descent to keep Jews and Muslims out of positions of power. And this idea did travel all the way to the New World. Hierarchies in schools, churches, and local government were mostly in administrative centers like Mexico City and Lima. They were easy to reinforce. But Spanish peninsulares are those born in Spain or born on the Iberian Peninsula. They rarely brought their families with them to the Western Hemisphere. So purity of blood, once you got away from the urban centers, it's much less of a reality. Now again, those born in Spain did enjoy a high degree of power and autonomy. The children of two peninsulares, known as Creoles, or a Creole is someone born in America, but has full Spanish blood. They would enjoy power, but not as much as Peninsulares because they were not lucky enough to have been born in Spain. Now again, once you leave these highly urbanized centers, the rules are a bit more fluid and a bit more lax. And there's dozens of examples of different social classes that are based on percentage of blood. And this table is very simplified. It represents what was known for certain at this time. At the bottom of society were Amerindians and African slaves, and they were generally forced to provide labor for the large haciendas and mines that exploited their status. Those who had a mix of Spanish and either native or African blood are just above those two. So we can see that a mix of native and Spanish blood, so a native parent and a Spanish parent, mestizo, and then mulatto for African and Spanish. This demonstrates that racial mixing was an accepted reality of life, but the concept of whiteness is still viewed in a superior way. Even in communities where mestizos or mulattoes formed a majority, Spanish blood is viewed to be superior. So this gives us a concept of how society is set up in New Spain. To demonstrate this new society, this system of racial hierarchy is called the casta system. And casta paintings were a tradition that arose in colonial New Spain to visually depict these classes. Because again, there's dozens of terms for the skin tones and racial mixtures that were a reality of everyday life. Often the paintings themselves would depict those with lighter skin as wealthier and obtaining social status. But we also see that those who weren't necessarily as well off would be depicted in a more sympathetic light. Often the paintings would take on this particular tone. You would have the labels for the parents, so 1 and 2, someone who's Spanish, and then an Amerindian. Their child is called mestizo. So 1 and 2 are the parents, 3 would be their child. Same thing we see depicted here. 1 parent is black, 1 parent is Spanish. Their child would have been referred to as mulatto. And again, if 1 parent is black, 1 parent is native, their child was referred to as lobo. So these artistic depictions reflect the reality of the time. Was class highly enforced in the urban cities? Yes, and it's not as if it didn't exist outside the cities. It just was more lax in terms of how they were enforced and how they affected one's place in society.